Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Music Maniacs with me, Dr. Earl, and Arknolia Strokabine. And what we're going to do right now is the first start of our look into various albums that made an major impact among society, mankind, musicians, all around, that made a big impact upon pop culture for many years. And I figure we start this series off with a look at what I consider one of the greatest summertime albums of all time from the Beatles, 1967's Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And the way I got introduced into this album was quite not so odd. My dad had the four track, which was similar to the 8-track cartridge that was used back in the 70s and early 80s there, before it went out of style around 82, 83. But instead of the four programs on the 8-track, it only had two, program one and two. And I was listening to the songs on this four track, and I was pretty amazed by not only the cover because the Beatles are sporting mustaches and looking more psychedelic, John Lennon's glasses, but I was also amazed by the music that I was hearing. It was like unbelievable. Now, years on down the line, when after got my first car, one of the first things I would get on the cassette player was, of course, the version of the same album. The CD version of the album just came out. It was highly publicized, and it also included this inner groove that really closed out the album of the UK version, not the US version. Now, Sgt. Pepper obviously made a big impact. Some regard it as a concept album. I don't know if it's true or not. Was it a concept album, Mark, by chance?
It can be fashioned that way, but probably it would not really.
All right, dear. I don't really know, but some speculate that it was written up that it may have been in a couple of articles I saw on the internet in the past. It was her eighth album, came out in May of 1967, and it came out, I guess, a day later in the US, a day after it came out originally in the UK, and was regarded as many as an early concept album that advanced the roles of sound composition, extended form, psychedelic imagery, record sleeves, and the producer in popular music. It had an intimate, cross generational impact and was associated with numerous tombstones of that era's youth culture, such as mysticism, fashion, drugs, and a sense of optimism and empowerment. Critics lauded the album for its innovations, songwriting, production, and graphic design, and bringing a cultural divide between popular music and high art, and for reflecting the interests of contemporary youth and the counterculture. And this album was definitely probably I consider many times one of the greatest summertime albums. I mean, I remember listening to the four track in our old backyard back at our home back in Southeast Michigan. And there were many times years on down the line, I'd be playing the same album on cassette in my very first automobile around Gratiot Avenue around the summer of 1987, 20 years after that album first came out. I mean, when you think about it, it was like it was a unique album. It did a lot of dares on it. I mean, the tape loops, the ending of A Day in the Life, and let's not forget the song A Day in the Life kind of contributed to the Paul McCartney is dead rumor that came out a couple years later on. And I'll let you, I'll let you, Ark, talk about the album a little bit, how it influenced you.
Well, I remember when it first came out. because I was around. Uh, Actually, I was 17, 16 years old. And basically, I had a friend come over to the house. And he said, "Have you heard this?" And he showed me the album. I said, "No." He said, "You got to hear this." And he brought it in the house. He just got it. It just came out. And he started to play it. And I'm sitting there listening, going, "Oh my gosh, this is incredible. What
It
is
is
this?"
absolutely, man. It was like when the
And
first
I'm
time
looking at the cover. I mean, the cover is incredible. Flip it inside, you got the lyrics, which was unheard of in those days to put on the album.
on the back cover.
Well, no, it was in the sleeve,
Oh,
the
yeah.
fold out.
The gatefold. Because I
Yeah,
remember
the
the
gatefold.
because one I remember was that gatefold had the Fab Four close up wearing the same outfits as the front cover, and the lyrics of the album was on the back cover. And of course, Paul's back his turn, obviously, which added more speculation to the Paul is dead rumor later
Yeah,
on.
yeah. I just remember it being an incredible cover, incredible album. I'm sitting there listening to it and thinking to myself, this is something. And it's really what's well. The other thing you got to mention about the Beatles is there was three other albums that could be considered groundbreaking: Rubber
Revolver,
Soul
Rubber Soul, and Revolver just as well.
and the White Album.
Oh yeah, that was probably one of the most diverse albums that the Fab Four has ever put it out. Every single genre was on that record, including avant-garde, noise, experimental, and we know which track we're referring to.
Country Western. I mean,
Yep,
it
yep.
was all there.
Rocky Raccoon, that song there was country western. A honky tonk like "Don't Pass Me By."
But I mean, their other albums were good, but they weren't. They were more standard
Yeah,
for the most part. But those four were just groundbreakers in their entirety. But Sergeant Pepper was the one that really put them on the map. They were
absolutely.
already on the map, but I mean, it kind of drew it
Well,
out
this
there.
really, this really took the cake and ran. That's for sure. This album sure did.
And what's funny is Paul once said that the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds inspired him to come up with the concept here and put it all together, which I found interesting because Pet Sounds is an innovative album.
That's true as well. We got to talk about that release sometime soon.
And you might also mention that the Rolling Stones, their Satanic Majesty's Request, was a
Yes,
direct answer to this album.
yes. In fact, both album covers were spoofed by Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention for an album they had called "We're Only in It for the Money," and it
Yeah,
had
I mean
it featured
this
Frank and the boys, dressed in dresses and somewhere set up like the Sergeant Pepper album cover, but it was kind of like different. Look, it was the Dollar Tree version. Needless to say, when you look at it there, but it was kind of no doubt what they're poking fun at. No doubt about that. Because on the Rolling Stones album cover, that same name that you mentioned, they're kind of like wearing gowns and wizard gowns and stuff like that on the front cover there. Which,
yeah,
by the way,
in the original album, it had some kind of translucent cover on it of some
hologram.
sort.
That's what it was called.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean it was a weird cover.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of bands at that time were trying different things in terms of album covers, music styles, you name it. It was a new era. People were exploring left and right, whether it's psychedelicas, music styles, everything else. I mean, like the Beatles themselves, they were starting to get into the Hare Krishna kind of style with the song "Within You, Without You."
George Harrison number.
Yeah, absolutely. And credit to George, he really he was basically the one who really carried the Hare Krishna trade throughout his whole life. I mean, he was devoted to that to the end of his life in 2001 when you think about it. But apparently, well, let me go on to the snippets from the Wikipedia that I got here. Revolver, which came out the year before, They continued the same technological experimentations marked by Revolver, but this time without an absolute deadline for completion. The sessions began on November 24th at EMI Studios with compositions inspired by the Beatles' youth. But after pressure from EMI, two of the songs, Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane, were kind of removed from the album. Those were supposed to have been on the album originally, but I guess
They ended up being a single.
yes, a very successful one. It was a
Yeah,
double
Penny
A
Lane
side.
backed with, yeah. Well, no, I
Hmm.
think they were on the same record.
Yes, you were supposed to have been, but I guess the length of vinyl at that time kind of prevented it that
No, I
because
mean they're a single.
mhm,
Penny Lane is on one side, Story Fields is on the other.
yes, it was a double A side
Excuse me.
and a very successful one, I should say. Both songs are still played on classic rock stations to this very day.
In fact, I remember when I was watching American Bandstand back in the day that those were the first two MIDI music videos pretty much ever made.
I
Penny
remember that.
Lane and Strawberry Fields.
Yes, and I remember Dick Clark. I watched that particular segment, and Dick Clark was asking the kids in the audience what he thought about the Beatles with mustaches because each one of them was sporting them and looking very different. Especially John Lennon, he was now wearing glasses as a result of filming How I Won the War, a movie that he did in the '66. He was required to wear these glasses, and for I understand, those glasses ended up being on his face for the remainder of his years because your eyes got adjust to them, obviously. But the look that they were sporting at that time with the mustaches, the glasses, and the clothing was most unique, no doubt about that. And if it's to say that the style with the standing behind that bass drum with the name of the album on front, I mean, I think I remember the Red Hot Chili Peppers did a little spoof of their own for some magazine cover. It may have been for Spin magazine somewhere in the early '90s. But needless to say, that album made a huge impact. And let's also not forget the movie, and which came out in 1978 with Peter Frampton, the Bee Gees, Aerosmith, Steve Martin, Alice Cooper, George Burns, featuring almost all the Beatles songs from that album, as well as a couple others from later on. Like in fact, I remember there was even a Broadway play prior to that, if I'm correct.
Hmm.
Yes. Well, I remember me and my mom, my sister saw that movie and back when it first came out, and you know what? Needless to say, I don't know if it was I don't recall if it was good or bad, if it did well at the audiences, but I sure remember that when the names of Aerosmith, Peter Frampton's names were shown on the screen, all the girls and the guys were like, "Yay, yay!" They were screaming like some teen idol had just walked upon the stage. Now, it was actually the album was loosely conceptuated as a performance by the fictional Sgt. Pepper Band, an idea that was conceived after recording the title cut. Now, Sgt. Pepper is considered one of the first art rock albums, kind of like a predecessor to progressive rock. Incorporates a range.
I could go along with that.
Yeah, it's true. And when you think about it, they are correct on that saying because a couple years later we would get prog rock bands like Yes, King Crimson, Genesis. And the album also incorporated a range of stylistic influences, including vaudeville, circus, music hall, avant-garde, western, Indian classical music, with assistance from their producer George Martin and engineer Jeff Emmerich. Much of the recordings were colored with sound effects, tape manipulations, and exemplified on Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Now, that song was actually based on a drawing that Lennon's son Julian had presented to him after coming home from school. And I guess, of course, the anti-rock crusade cited it as something involving LSD because of the words blue sea sky diamonds, all beginning with LSD. They were thinking that this is what you sound when you visualize when you're on LSD, which, of course, as we mentioned, is not true, obviously. Of course, Day in the Life being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, and the recording was completed on April 21st. The cover, which depicts the Beatles posing in the front of a tableau of celebrities and historic figures, was designed by Jan Haworth and Peter Blake.
And they originally had some celebrity that got removed, blacked
Really?
out, whatever,
Ah,
because they didn't get their approval. And I'm trying to think of who it was. I think it was Mae West.
oh, really? So that's something there. I know one
I
of
don't
the.
know. You probably run across it in the article.
I know. I know one key that kind of like led to the Paul is dead rumor was his hand that's supposed to be above Paul's head by one of the figures that they have behind him. And I guess when you put that over someone's head, that means that that individual is dead, if I'm correct.
Yeah.
hmm Now, it was the first Beatles album to be released with the same track listing on both the UK and the US. Because prior to that, the albums like Rubber Soul, Revolver, the tracks were different in the UK than they were in the US. Obviously, we knew that.
Yeah. Generally, the UK version had a couple extra tracks for the most part
Yes,
from
and
the US version.
exactly there. Now, it spent 27 weeks at number one on the record retailer chart in the United Kingdom and 15 weeks at number one on the Billboard Top LPs chart in the US. The following year, it won 4 Grammy Awards for Album of the Year, the first rock LP to receive this honor, and in 2003, it was inducted into the National Recording Registry by the Library of Congress for being culturally, historically, or artistically significant. It has topped several critics and listeners' polls for the best album of all time, including those published by Rolling Stone magazine and in the book All Time Rock 1000 Albums, and the UK's Music of the Millennium poll. More than 32 million copies have been sold worldwide as of 2011. It remains one of the top selling albums of all time and was still, in 2018, the UK's best selling studio album, and a remix and expanded version was later released in 2017. Right.
Yeah, it'd be hard not to put it on my say top 10.
Yeah.
Number one, I'd have to think about it, but I don't know. I might go with that.
Mm,
But it's hard. Well, some of the other albums that we'll discuss would definitely be in my top 10, but
yep.
that would probably be in my top 10. I mean, I still remember the impact the first time I heard it. And believe me, it had only been out like 3 days when I heard it.
I know that there's a story that Jimi Hendrix, and there's video proof of this. Jimi Hendrix buying the UK version, and then he started performing it in some of his concerts. And in fact,
Yeah.
it's no doubt that he did that live, and props to Hendrix for doing that.
Oh, he was definitely a fan.
Yeah, as well as a fan of Bob Dylan. He respected both, no doubt about that. Now, of course, the story is that in John Lennon's opinion, they had grown weary of live performances, Lennon even said they could send out 4 waxworks and that would satisfy the crowds. The concerts had nothing to do with music anymore. They're just bloody tribal rights. And by
Yeah,
June
they
60,
pretty much quit touring at this point. You're right.
exactly. And in 66, they had announced that they'll just have people just got to rely on radio and the albums. And 2 days after finishing the Revolver album, the group set off for a tour that started in West Germany. And while in Hamburg, they received an anonymous telegram saying, "Do not go to Tokyo. Your life is in danger." The threat was taken seriously in the light of the controversy surrounding the tour among Japan's religious and conservative groups, with particular opposition to the Beatles' planned performances at the sacred Nippon Budokan Arena. And as an added precaution, 35,000 police were mobilized and tasked with protecting the group, who were transported from hotels to concert venues with an armored vehicle. The Beatles had performed in the Philippines, where they were threatened and mishandled by its citizens for not visiting First Lady Emilia Marcos. The group were angry with their manager, Brian Epstein, for insisting on what they regarded as an exhausting and demoralizing, what's it called? They basically put him through hell during that period of time, the manager did, and they
Hmm.
were not happy about it one bit. And of course, we cannot forget that famous remark that John Lennon said in an interview that the Beatles have become more popular than Jesus Christ. That got the group in big trouble with that remark. Now, Lennon wasn't trying to say that they were bigger than Jesus altogether, but they were trying to say that it's now gotten to the point where the Beatles are now bigger than both Jesus Christ and everything else. He stated that television could be bigger than Jesus Christ because everybody tunes into it. Men, women, children, you name it. Now, as a result of that remark, even though John Lennon did apologize, a U.S. tour planned in August of '66 was marked by reduced ticket sales relative to the group's record attendance in '65, and some part performances proved to be their last. Now, some author, Nicholas Schaffer, what's his name? Shanafir, I think that's how it's pronounced, my bad. He wrote, quote, "To the Beatles, playing such concerts had become a charade, so remote from the new directions that they were pursuing, that not a single tune was attempted from the just released Revolver album, whose arrangements were for the most part impossible and reproduced with the limitations imposed by their 2 guitars, bass, and drums stage lineup." You got to remember, you got to have a lot of special effects or a tape machine to complete some of the loops and everything else that they done on the Revolver album.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and the same thing with I should say there's most of these industrial bands like Frontline Assembly, Suicide Commando, Wumpscut. They have to rely on recordings or backing tracks a lot of times because you're going to have a lot of percussionists, a lot of keyboard players to somewhat reproduce the same sounds for your live shows. Now, groups like A Pop to Makeup, Berserk, and Skinny Puppy and Frontline Assembly were able to accomplish that. But there are lesser known industrial bands that have to rely on just the keyboard playing the track throughout the whole set. And I guess in Beatles' case, they would have to do the exact same thing. Now, keep in mind, Pink Floyd did it a few times for their performances of Dark Side of the Moon.
Yeah, that one been a tough one in concert. Of
Yes, eh,
course.
yes. Of course, they were able to have tapes playing throughout some of the performances, no doubt about that. Now, George Harrison decided to take a 3-month break, including in which a focus on individual interests. Harrison traveled to India for about 6 weeks to study the sitar, spelled sitar, a stringed
Right.
instrument, and develop his interest in Hindu philosophy.
I think he learned from Ravi Shankar.
Exactly, yes. In fact, Ravi Shankar was had one of his albums produced by Harrison himself. Now, Paul McCartney collaborated with Beatles producer George Martin for the soundtrack of the movie The Family Way, and he also he took a vacation in Kenya, Africa, and one of the four Beatles managers, Mel Evans, went with him. Lennon was in the movie I just mentioned, How I Won the War. He attended art showings. That's where he met his future wife, Yoko Ono. And Ringo Starr used the break to spend time with his wife, Maureen, and his son, Zach. Now, there was a couple of controversies about. I know one of there was a. I'm getting tongue tied, ladies and gentlemen. You have to forgive me. I got to work on that, most definitely. But one of the tracks of the album, "Getting Better," there was
Oh
something that,
boy.
yeah, that one of the last verse of that album of that song kind of struck me. I used to be cruel to my woman. I beat her and kept her apart from the things that she loved.
Yeah, it's. I knew you were going to touch on that.
Yeah, that I found out that Lennon at that time was being that way towards his wife Cynthia. Now I do not know if it was actually like that for sure, but if he was, then shame on him most definitely. Now the title "It's Getting Better," by the way, for understand, the Beatles had a stand-in drummer. I forgot the guy's name, and after each show, Paul would ask him, "How's it coming along?" And the stand-in drummer would be like, "It's getting better. It's getting better." And so that's where that title came from. I'll let Art take over a little bit there. I gotta get someone to drink.
Well, I was going to kind of go over the tracks a little bit here. Chime in when you want to. The album starts off with the title track, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, basically sung by McCartney. And, like we discussed, is talking about an imaginary band that's fixing to start a show.
Yep,
Then it comes into With a Little Help from My Friends, which is sung by Ringo Starr.
as Billy Shears
Right. And basically, that song was covered magnificently, I might say,
by
by
Joe.
Joe Cocker.
Yep, exactly. The Woodstock performance a couple years later. And let's not forget he did another Beatles cover. She came in through the bathroom window.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Then that was followed by Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which we talked about a minute ago.
Yep,
Then that was followed by Getting Better, that he just talked about just
yep,
less than a minute ago.
yeah, exactly.
Then after that came Fixing a Hole,
Good song there.
McCartney song, or
Yep,
he sang it. And the
absolutely.
story goes that they all say Lennon McCartney, but whoever sang the lead actually wrote the song.
Exactly. I guess they agreed to share credits, so each both get multiple amounts of money and songwriting credits there.
And next song was She's Leaving Home, which was different for that album.
Yes, and
But
you know what?
go
It's
ahead.
kind of I saw a couple of reaction videos where the video YouTuber would listen to the song, and this one lady was listening to a track and she was almost in tears because of the tone of the song. That
Yeah,
song was about a girl who, despite having loving parents, decides to tread off on her own and searches something that's not in the household. Apparently, I don't know if it's
yeah.
look for love or something else, but many people have felt that particular way. Like there's something missing in the household that I'm desiring for, whether it's affection, attention, pure, unequated, outstanding love. It's like, but sometimes, households are like that, where the mom and
Hmm.
dad are unable to really see through what's going on with their child. And as a result, the daughter in this case decides to depart from the household.
Yeah.
Yes.
Then the next one was Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite, which is Circus Kylo. I mean Calliope. Uh,
Yep.
Very circusy sounding.
Very circusy sounding. And you could hear the tape loops going just going left and right.
Yeah, that concluded side one.
Yep.
Then you hit side two. First song is the Harrison composition Within You, Without You,
Yep. Featuring the
which you,
sitar.
yeah, that's true. You could hear the sitar in it.
Yep.
Then another little bouncy tune. I don't know what else to call it.
Vaudeville.
When I'm 64.
Yep. Will you still love me when even though I grow so old to the point where I have trouble walking?
Then they followed that by Lovely Rita,
Hmm.
which the full title was actually Lovely Rita Meter Maid.
Yeah, which is about a night out with a meter maid. And the meter maid, by the way, are the ladies who go by meters and I guess write tickets for them if the meters expired for the cars that are
Right.
fixed on. Yep.
Yeah, basically that's a UK thing.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say the same thing.
Then that followed with Good Morning, which was just basically
Another
good.
composition by Harrison.
No,
Oh.
Lennon.
Oh, okay.
Well, Lennon McCartney.
But I know George Harrison sings on it, if I'm correct.
Well, according to what I'm saying, Lennon's the only one.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to look that up there during this article here. And of course,
Well,
the
that's where I
album.
am.
Okay, good, good. All right, so my bad.
And then Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band Reprise.
Yep. Where they say goodnight to the audience. It's been a lovely show. We thank you once again.
And the album concludes with A Day in the Life, which has got to be one of the most awesome closing tracks ever, which
Yeah.
was basically a combination of two songs. The first part, A Day in the Life, which kind of like Lennon, and
Yep.
then the middle part, where he
By
woke up,
Paul.
got out of bed,
By
was
Paul.
mostly Paul.
Yep.
But they combined the two songs into one. And at the end, I forget exactly how George Martin termed it, but he told the audience just to, or the
Well,
orchestra just to go crazy. I mean,
yeah,
just
exactly.
play.
In fact, if you hear it, I don't know if you could hear it in the new studio mix by his son Giles, but on the original copies of the album, you could hear a 5, 4, 3, too young, and that's when the orchestra builds up. And this was during when after Lennon says, "I love to turn young," you could hear that countdown, and the audience and the orchestra building up, and then boom, you hear this big boom, and believe it
Which
or
is the
not,
longest chord in history according to the Guinness Book of World Records.
exactly. And what I guess what Martin did is that as he started to fade out, Martin would turn the volume all the way up so that chord would last to the very completion.
I've never timed it, but I bet it's almost a minute long.
I believe so, yeah. And then on the UK version, as you mentioned at the beginning of the program, there was this inner groove. And I'm not too sure how that's done there. Let me look it up here. Blah, blah, blah. Day in the life. Let's hear. Oh, yeah. And I don't think it says anything about that inner groove there, unfortunately. But
Well, basically, it's just kind of nonsensical stuff.
I said, I know that was included finally in the US version when it first came out in 1987. No doubt about that.
I think it only lasts like 15, 30 seconds, something like that. It's
I
not very
believe
long.
exactly. Now, according to a source, With Sergeant Pepper's opening song, he said, quote, "The Beatles manufacture an artificial textual space in which to stage their art. The reprise of the title song appears on side two, as we mentioned, just before the climactic day in the life, creating a framing device. In Lennon and Starr's view, only the two first songs and the reprise are conceptually connected. In a 1980 interview, Lennon stated that his compositions had nothing to do with the Sgt. Pepper concept, adding that Sgt. Pepper is called the first concept album, but it doesn't go anywhere. It
Yeah,
works because,
that that sounds right to me, actually.
yeah, it works because we said it worked. And another person's point of view, the Beatles chose to employ an overarching thematic concept in a apparent effort to ununify individual tracks. The album's musical unity results from relationships between key areas, particularly involving C, E, and G, and the recording's use of common harmonic patterns and failing melodies contributes to its overall cohesiveness.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. It's cohesive without it being written to be cohesive.
Yep, exactly. Now, in the 1995 interview, Paul recalled the Liverpool childhood theme behind the first three songs recorded during the sessions were never formalized as a album wide concept, but did state that it served as a device of underlying theme throughout the project.
I've seen Paul McCartney in concert twice,
Hmm.
and the second one he played Sergeant Pepper.
Yep, exactly. I remember I guess during the Live 8 performance in 2005 in Hyde Park, London, he came out with the members of U2 and they performed the song Sergeant Pepper, but they should at least have done a little help from my friends along with it. In fact,
Hmm.
if I had my way, Ringo could come out and sing the lead. That would have been a joy to see Paul and Ringo on stage together with the members of U2.
Yeah, that would have been good. Oh, I
Beyond
might
good.
mention right now
Hmm.
that Styx put out a Sergeant Pepper. They did an entire album,
Mm.
Sergeant Pepper.
Oh, really? Is their own
Yeah,
version of it? That's interesting.
right.
Wow. Interesting. And this must have been after Dennis DeYoung's departure, if I'm correct.
To be honest with you, I'm not real sure,
Hmm.
but I just know that I had it in my uh, music collection.
I see. Yeah. Well,
But they basically put out Sergeant Pepper also, a cover of the entire album.
right
Who
there.
does that?
Well, I know Dream Theater did their version of Dark Side of the Moon. It's on YouTube right now. I watched many sections from that, and you know what? They were spot on in their performance, no doubt about that.
And of course, the Pulse. Well, we'll get into that when we cover that album.
Yeah, absolutely, or definitely. I think that may be our next album to discuss next time, no doubt.
Yeah,
All
that
right,
might
there.
be a good idea.
Absolutely. There. I know you mentioned that like the week before. Now, the back cover, the gatefold, and the cutouts. Let's not forget they came out with some cutouts.
Right.
Now, the March 67 photo session with the Cooper also produced the back cover and the inside gatefold, which many people described as conveying an obvious and intimate warmth, which which distanced it from the what's it, well, son of a bitch, sterility, if I'm correct.
Sterility.
Thank you. And typical of such images. McCartney recalled the inner gatefold image as an example of the Beatles' interest in I messages, adding, Quote, with Michael Cooper's inside photo, we all said, now look into this camera and we say, I love you. Really try and feel love and really give love through this. And if you're looking at it, you'll see the big effort from the eyes. In Lennon's description, Cooper's photos of the band showed two people who were on flying high on drugs and two who aren't. And the lyrics were printed on the back of the album cover, and
Right.
this was
Okay.
the first time that was done on a rock album. The album's inner sleeve featured artwork by the Dutch design team known as The Fool that eschewed for the first time the standard white paper in favor of an abstract pattern of waves of maroon, pink, red, and white. And included as a bonus gift was a sheet of cardboard cutouts designed by Blake and his other guy there, Haworth, that's his name there. These consisted of a postcard sized portrait of the Sergeant Pepper individual based on British Army officer James Melville Babington, but also as noted as being similar to a statue from Lennon's house that was used on the front cover. A fake mustache was also included, and two sets of sergeant stripes, two lapel badges, and a stand up cutout of the band in their satin uniforms.
I wish I still had that album.
I know. You know what? Most likely it'll probably be included in the new versions, the new studio versions that came out not too long ago on vinyl. I'd be surprised if they weren't, to be honest.
Yeah, that's one of those things I regret about having to get rid of my albums, just getting rid of that one for sure.
Yes, and sad you what
Because it sometimes some of those insets turn out to be
Clanton.
unreal. Because I
Absolutely.
bought Leonard Skinner's Street Survivors right after it came out, and of course they went down what a couple of weeks later.
Yes, and that's the original album cover with Steve Games looking like he was an
Well,
old
not only
golf.
that, the insert had their tour on it.
Hmm.
Just a printout of where they were going to go and where they were going to be.
Yes,
And boy, I bet you can't find that insert anymore.
exactly. Let alone some of the, well, they are coming out with the original album cover for the new releases of that release. In fact, a lot of albums that were censored back in the day are now coming out with this original form. Because
The
now,
Beatles yesterday and today.
yes, I would love to see that album come out sometime soon, if Capitol allows it, Capital EMI, that is, or Capital Universal, as it's now
Well, the
known
same
as.
friend that brought me Sergeant Pepper to here brought me the Yesterday and Today album right after it came out,
Hmm.
which had the new cover on it, but underneath was the old cover because I just pasted it over
Yeah, I know.
before on a few of the copies because I
Yeah,
didn't want to redo them.
exactly. I remember. Yes, I remember hearing about that in the news special years ago when I was a kid.
We spent almost an entire day trying to take that new cover off so we could see the original cover,
Hmm.
and that was tough because it's glued on pretty good.
Exactly. The album was previewed on the pirate radio station Radio London on May 12th and officially on the BBC Light Programs show where it's at, hosted by Kenny Everett. I remember hearing that name for many years there. Everett played the entire album apart from A Day in the Life. The day before Everett's broadcast, Brian Epstein hosted a launch party for music journalists and disc jockeys at his house in central London, and the event was intended in pop promotion and furthered the significance of the album's release. One of the reporters from the magazine Melody Maker described it as the first listen in and typical of the Beatles' penchant for innovation. And the party marked the band's first group interaction with the press in close of a year. because Beatles did lots of interviews when they first came out for the past couple of years, and I guess kind of strayed away from that. And for
Yeah.
this release, they decided to do it once again. Now, some of the journalists present shocked by the Beatles' appearance, especially of Harrison and Lennon, as the band members' bohemian attire contrasted sharply with their former image, with the suits and ties, the mop
Right.
top hairdos. Music journalist Ray Coleman recalled that Lennon looked haggard, old, and ill, and clearly under the influence of drugs. A biographer named Howard Sounds likens the Beatles' presence to a gathering of the British royal family and highlights a photo from the event that shows Lennon shaking McCartney's hand in an exaggeratedly congratulating way, throwing his head back in sarcastic laughter. On May 26th, Sergeant Pepper was given a rush release in the UK a day ahead of the scheduled date of June 1st. The band's eighth LP. It was the first Beatles album where the track listings, as we mentioned earlier, was the same for both the UK and US versions. Now, the US release took place the day after the UK release, June 2nd. Capitol Records, advertising for the album, emphasized that the Beatles and Sgt. Pepper's band were one and the same. And the public reaction by this was perceived by listeners as the soundtrack to the Summer of Love. I remember hearing about that a lot of times
Hmm.
before. And it was during the year that author Peter Levenzoli calls a watershed moment in the West where the search for higher consciousness and an alternative worldview had reached critical mass. And one of the writers from Rolling Stone, he recalled, quote unquote, the closest Western civilization has come to unity since the Congress of Vienna in 1815 was the week Sergeant Pepper was released. In every city in Europe and in America, the radio stations played it, and everyone listened. For a brief while, the fragmented consciousness of the West was unified, at least in the minds of the youth. Now, according to another source, the album drew people together through the common experience of pop on a larger scale than ever before. And in another opinion of another writer, an almost religious awe surrounded the LP. That person described the impact was cross generational, as young and old alike were entranced and era defying. In that psychic shiver, it expired across the world and was nothing less than a cinematic dissolve from one zeitgeist to another. And in one individual's view, the Sgt. Pepper album conveyed the psychedelic experience so effectively to listeners unfamiliar with hallucinogenic drugs that if such a thing as a cultural contact high is possible, it happened right here on this record. A music journalist named Mark Ellen, who was a teenager in '67, recalls listening to part of the album at a friend's house and then hearing the rest playing on the next house that he visited, as if the record was communicating from one house to another. He said the most remarkable thing was its acceptance by adults who had turned against the Beatles when they become gaunt and enigmatic or enigmatic. What's that word?
Enigmatic.
Thank you very much. And how the group recasts as polished masters of ceremony and were now the very family favorites that they sought to satirize. And in his book, Peter Doggett, Peter Doggett, the writer, of the book Electric Shock. My apologies there, folks. Described Sergeant Pepper as the biggest pop happening to take place between the Beatles' debut on American television in '64 and Lennon's murder in December of 1980. A whole generation still used to having happy landmarks through life would always remember exactly when and where they first played it. And the album's impact was felt at the Monterey Pop Festival, the second event of the Summer of Love, organized by a couple of organizers whose name I cannot pronounce. Sergeant Pepper was played in stands here and there, and festival staff wore badges carrying Lennon's lyric, "A splendid time is guaranteed for all." Wow. So this
from
album
Sergeant
definitely
from
made. Mhm.
being for the benefit of Mr. Kite.
Yeah, absolutely there. Now, did you ever see the Sergeant Pepper movie with the Bee Gees, Peter Frampton, Aerosmith, George
No, I never
Burns?
did.
No, I remember seeing it with my mom, my sister, and myself at the movie theaters. And like I said, when the names were first read on the screen there at the opening, all the girls out there was screaming like some teen idol had just walked onto the stage out of the blue. And it was basically a story of a band of the same name. Peter Frampton played Billy Shears. The Bee Gees played the Henderson brothers. And of course, George Burns was Mr. Kite, and who was the mayor of Pepperland, of course. And Billy
Right,
Preston, who played with the Beatles on their album Let It Be and the sessions regarding that album, he made an appearance in the movie singing, of course, Get Back, one of the closing tracks of that movie.
right.
And he did a pretty good job, no doubt about it. And also credit to Earth, Wind, and Fire. They're in the movie just as well, performing Got to Get You Back in My Life, which they did an excellent cover version of, no doubt about it. Basically, it was like a musical, a storyline. Alice Cooper was there playing father son. In fact, it was probably one of the first times we ever saw Alice Cooper with a mustache.
Hmm.
Yeah, quite interesting to see, no doubt about that. Now, the villain in this movie was Mr. Mustard, named after, of course, Mean Mr. Mustard. And of course, Beatle references and song titles all over the place, no doubt about it. Now, I don't recall if it was a flop or was a success. I just saw the movie. But at the same, I liked it, but at the same time, I was disgruntled. I don't know.
I
I don't
believe
remember
that
why.
it didn't do as well as they expected.
I
I don't
think
know whether they considered it a flop or not, but
I should probably look it up sometime soon, when we get to movie madness. But either way, Sergeant Pepper, the album, made a huge impact upon pop culture. It made a huge impact upon Beatle fans. It made a huge impact on critics. And it made a huge impact in society altogether. No doubt about that. They have definitely reinvented themselves top notch, although they did it earlier with the recent album before that, Revolver, of course. But Sergeant Pepper took that to the next level.
yeah, they basically like climbing a hill. Started with Rubber Soul, went to Sergeant to Revolver, and then
Revolver.
Sergeant Pepper.
Yes. And what can we say? The album is still regarded as one of the summertime albums of all time. It's still one of my favorites, next to
Yeah, and actually, anybody that knocks the album now had to they should realize what it did at that period of time, not how it sounds today. I
yeah.
mean, obviously it doesn't sound like anything can put out today because they didn't have a lot of the things. But for that period of time, it's well and above anything else at that time,
Exactly. Nowadays, we could use digital structures, digital equipment to recreate
which
some
is
of these
sound
sounds.
automatic and machinic.
Yep. But back then, stuff like that was like groundbreaking, way groundbreaking. And no doubt about it, it took a lot of time to create those sounds alone, those tape loops. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
Whereas today, you could just do it in a couple of seconds and bing, bam, boom, it's right there at your feet. All right, there. So I think we ought to end this episode with probably one of the most stupidest quotes from Keith Richards. Now, we respected Keith Richards for being a Time Lord and all that, since you're still around with everybody else that passed on. But, dude, for you to say Sergeant Pepper was rubbish, mm-mm, mm-mm, mm-mm. Bad Keith, bad Keith, bad idea. Sergeant Pepper remains one of the best summer albums of all time. Great albums when you're riding a bike, whenever you're driving in your automobile, whether it's in heavy traffic during the summertime, sun shining down, not a cloud in the sky. You know, no doubt about it. It is a summertime album for all ages.
Yeah.
When you're at the beach, soaking up the sun or swimming in the water there.
Okay. Next week we're going to talk about Dark Side of the Moon.
Absolutely, yes. I was going to say earlier on, we are going to be talking about that album and what impact that album made in rock and roll pop culture for sure.
Oh, okay. What about tomorrow night?
All right, what do you want to do tomorrow night, man?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Can't really think of anything wrestling off the top of my head that we hadn't already covered.
We haven't
Uh,
done a movie show in a long while.
well, or TV, either one.
Okay, so what would you like to do? Because I'm kind of like up in the air on both myself.
Well, if we do a movie show, I don't know whether we need to go back to bad movies we like
Hmm.
or,
How about this idea? We could talk about All in the Family, how groundbreaking that show was.
yeah, that
Definitely
would be
got to
all right.
absolutely because there were a lot of topics discussed on that program. There are a lot of subjects that we people still speak about to this very day.
Yeah. Yeah,
Including
let's do that. Tomorrow
yeah,
night, all in the
absolutely.
family.
All right, there. Definitely for sure. I will definitely get everything set up for it. And like we said, we'll have to record it and then set it as a premiere. No doubt about that for sure.
That's fine.
So, all right, there. So, like I stated, because of the issues with my OBS, I tried to do a techno stream the night before, but unfortunately, the same old no data stream will end shortly. There, YouTube has not received enough video, and you may recall a couple of times last week and the week before, the streams that we were doing live on my channel ended abruptly because of these issues.
Right.
So for the time being, we're going to have to record them, either
We'll
upload
put them
them
on a
as
little later. Yep.
exactly. I'm going to premiere this episode for a certain time, and that's about it.
Okay.
All right, there. So
Then I'll let you go till tomorrow night.
all right, tomorrow night, TV memories, all the family. Be there, be square, people. All right. For Arknolia and myself, everybody have a good time. And once again, my apologies to everyone who are getting irated with my mis pronunciation of words and my slip ups on the tongue there. Yeah,
Hey, don't worry about it. You're human.
I know there, but I know it gets in the eyes of some people. I should expect to do better. You know, I've always had trouble talking. You can ask my sister about that, and she'll tell you 100%. I've always had that issue.
Well, some of those people have trouble with other things. So,
Yeah,
everybody's
sure,
got trouble.
exactly. So in the future, I'm going to work on the this issue there myself. And thank you once again for watching the show, and we'll see you tomorrow night. Bye bye.
Bye bye.